Fear is there to help you to maintain whatever you identify with. That's the key insight. To maintain whatever you believe you are. And here I have to refer you to my 2-part series of very foundational episodes called Understanding Survival, Part 1 and Part 2, where I go into a lot of depth about what survival is that I'm not going to be able to go into again here. So you're going to have to bring those insights to bear on this discussion because we're really building on top of that. See? Survival is not just about surviving physically as a body, like I talked about in that 2-part series. Survival is much more sophisticated, subtle, and elaborate than that. It's much more conceptual, especially when it comes to humans. For humans, most of our survival is social, cultural, highly conceptual. So when I say that fear is a control mechanism, a self-control mechanism that helps to maintain your identity and to keep you alive, I don't mean that it helps to keep your body alive in the very simplistic sense that, oh, well, I see a bear as I'm walking through the woods and then I crap my pants with fear and I run away and that helps me to live. Of course, that's clearly a function of fear, but that's such a basic black and white function of fear that it's not even really worth discussing here. We're interested in the more sophisticated, complicated ways in which fear controls our lives in the social, cultural context in which we live. When you're going to work, when you're in a sexual, intimate relationship, when you're in a family situation, when you're dealing with religion, with politics, with government, with business, with finances. All of these subdomains of your life are permeated by fear. See? And so what the fear is doing, it's not just keeping your ass physically alive. The fear is maintaining your identity. And your identity, like I said in the survival series, your identity is a very specific, peculiar, unique thing to you. It's your self-image. It's what you think you are. And that self-image is variable. It varies greatly from person to person, from country to country, from era to era in human history, from culture to culture. Don't make the mistake of thinking that everyone's identity is basically the same. It's not basically the same. People have enormously different identities. So someone who identifies as being a Christian is going to have a very different set of fears and self-control mechanisms for his survival as a Christian than someone who identifies as an atheist or as a materialist scientist or as an agnostic or as a Hindu or as a Muslim. See? So what you're surviving is not just your physical body, but you're surviving, let's say in this case, the specific way in which you're being a Christian. Because when you have that identity of being a Christian, that permeates your whole life. It permeates and affects what you do on the weekends. It affects what books you read. It affects what movies you watch. It affects what people you hang out with. It affects your worldview. It affects your moral system. It affects who you're going to marry. It affects how you're going to raise your children. You see a lot of stuff. But don't make the mistake of thinking that I'm just talking about some wacky religious nutcases here. It doesn't matter if you're a scientific person. That too completely affects how you live your life. What kind of books you read, what kind of people you take seriously, what kind of videos you watch, how you educate your kids, what kind of school you send them to, what ideas you tell them about emotions versus logic. For example, a lot of materialists and atheists get this very silly idea in their mind of like, oh, facts over feelings. Emotions aren't even important because all we care about is the facts. Which, of course, even just that position itself is not factual, but emotional. So watch out. This is very tricky stuff. Fear is survival at its most basic. Fear is what gets you to avoid the stuff that will kill you. Again, not just physically, you're not just going to be avoiding fire and tall ledges and cliffs and rooftops and sharp, pointy objects. You're also going to be avoiding the stuff that will kill you psychologically, that will kill your self-image. So if you have the self-image of being a Christian, guess what you're going to fear? You're going to fear precisely those things which would destroy your Christian identity or your Muslim identity. Or if you're a scientist, you're going to fear those things which are going to destroy your scientific, materialistic, atheistic identity. And you better believe that's going to distort how you do your science. See? Because what if there is something that's true about reality, but which threatens your scientific identity? Are you going to ever find that thing that is true? Or are you going to be afraid of it because it threatens your scientific identity? You see, in this way, fear is a very important component in doing accurate science. You can't do accurate science when you're afraid. And in fact, you can't have an accurate perception of reality so long as you're afraid. And so long as you're attached to any kind of identity, you're of course afraid of that identity getting erased, dissolved, impinged upon, contradicted, shown to be fallacious. Here's a key insight for you. What you are is defined by your fears, and what you fear defines what you identify as. It's sort of a vicious circle. It goes both ways. So what do I mean by this? I mean that if you identify with being a mother or a father, that's your identity. And that comes with a certain set of fears. If you identify with having children, needing to protect them, if you identify with your family, loving your family, and that becomes part of your identity, like, oh, well, I'm part of this family, I got to protect the heritage of my family. That's your identity, and just based on that, I can tell you what you fear. How about career and business? If you're identified with your career, if you, for example, you identify with being a movie director or a successful business guy, or with being a great artist or a great composer or musician or DJ or a great author or writer or whatever, that's your identity. And a lot of your fears, I can easily predict that a lot of your fears are going to be wrapped up very tightly around that issue, because that career for you plays a huge part of your life. Maybe a whole third of your life, or maybe even half of your life is going to be devoted to that career if you're serious about it. And so, of course, you're going to have so many fears, unique fears related to that particular career or business that you run. If you identify with your possessions, like your house or your car or your boat or your private jet, and you cherish them like your pet or like a child almost, like you collect cars, then you're going to be afraid of losing that car collection. If you have an identity that's based around money, success, fame, or status, you're going to be very touchy and fearful around losing money, success, fame, and status, and about being perceived as a loser or a failure, or losing your popularity. You're going to be very touchy about these things. And you're going to treat them very seriously, almost like life and death. You see, for someone who's addicted to success and fame and money and status and power, for them, the threat of losing that is worse than losing a child. See, so what I want you to understand here is that I don't want you to fall into this mistake of thinking that, well, you know, if I identify with being a physical human being and a mother and a father, that's like real, that's tangible, that's physical. Whereas if some other dude identifies with his car collection or with his private yacht or with his fame and his status on Instagram or whatever, then, oh, well, that's just frivolous stuff and that's not a real identity. So his fears aren't legitimate. No, there's no such thing as legitimate versus illegitimate fear. In a sense, all fear is illegitimate. And it's all relative to whatever you identify with. If you identify with being attractive or having hair, You're going to be afraid of losing your hair. You're going to be afraid of losing your attractiveness. If you identify with being a good person, a kind, loving person who's nice and friendly all the time, you're going to be afraid of losing that, of being perceived as a bad, evil person, of being hated by others or criticized by others. And that's going to be a constant force in your life. You're going to be battling that all the time. And that's basically what we're talking about here with these fears, is that whatever you fear, you're going to be battling with that demon. It's like an inner demon that you have. You're going to be battling with it your whole life. It's not just going to be a thing that, pops up once or twice and then goes away. No. Which is why we need to go so deep on this topic.